Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. or good evening. It's 5 minutes past 4. So just start. So, share my screen.
Jesus.
So as part of our protocol, like last week, kindly mute your microphones so that we won't be interrupted in any way. And then if you wish to speak, you can just indicate by showing your reaction, maybe by raising your hands also, so that you'll be allowed to speak. So I welcome everyone to the second session of this internship program. Last week was an amazing one. We had a couple of lessons from last week. Last week was when we discussed the general overview of the oil and gas industry. So we gave a general overview of the oil and gas industry and the power sector. We talked about the midstream, the downstream, the upstream, and then in the power sector, we talked about the generation segment, distribution, and transmission and distribution segment. And we also talked about trading, the trading session, and system operations also. So this week, we would basically be discussing the aspect on regulatory regime and licensing regime. Licensing, basically, that's what we'll be discussing this week. So it is essential to understand some basic things when it comes to licensing in the energy sector, because it is obvious that you can't just wake up one day and decide to venture into the power sector or into the oil and gas industry. And as an energy enthusiast also, it is very imperative for you to know about how to go about licenses, what kind of licenses you should get. If you want to start generating power for yourself, what kind of license are you supposed to get, and what are the requirements to get these licenses? We also talk about the regulators, their powers and their functions, how their powers and functions affect your operation as a player in the energy sector. And this also applies to players in the renewable energy sector also. So they are not excluded from this arrangement. Then we explain their powers and functions, of course, and then their importance of the major licenses. Now, before we delve into the topic for today, or to this session, I would just like us to go over the assignments that we had the other day, that we discussed rather. So I'm sure most of you submitted the task and you were able to, please let me change my connections. You were able to attempt the task. You were able to attend the task. So I'll be calling on various persons randomly to walk us through the process when attempting the question, and then just to gain more insights. Maybe there's another perspective that they've brought into the discussion that I didn't touch on the oil and gas value chain or the petroleum value chain. So I would do that now. I'll do that now. Is Samuel on the call?
Yes, I am.
Samuel, if you're on the call, please indicate. Okay.
I am on the call, sir.
Okay. Okay. Do you have your presentation with you there so that you can guide us through? I would allow you to share your screen.
Okay, yes,
quickly.
it is, but then it's on my laptop. Can you hear me?
Okay, can you share your screen?
Like, it is on my laptop, not on the phone. I sent it through the laptop.
Okay, so you're unable to share your screen now?
Yes, sir.
Is Kasmi Chisom Ugu on the call? Kasmi, are you on the call? Let me see. Sorry, okay, she's not on the call rather. Let me. Astrop, you're on the call. Astrop, are you there? Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes, sir, we can hear you,
We
sir.
can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I had connection problems. So I guess I should just go straight into um today's session without wasting our time at all. And then at the end of the program, at the end of the session rather, would review all what we the task we were assigned to do. So today we are discussing the regulatory and licensing regime. I've said that earlier. So from the power sector, from the oil and gas sector, of course, okay. Sorry, I didn't even know I had this part prepared already. I just wanted to jump into the session. So these teasers, I prepared them last week, but because of time, we weren't able to address them. So anyone from the audience can answer this. What segment of the petroleum value chain does refining and crude oil exports fall under? Anyone?
Sir, it fall under midstream. Under midstream, sir.
Yes, sir. It falls under midstream.
Midstream, yes, you're correct. You're correct. However, just take note that there are some overlapping functions of the NMDPRA. You know, the NMDPRA regulates the midstream sector, while the NUPRC regulates the upstream sector. So in the process, in the value chain, there are these instances where their regulatory functions overlap. In reality, there are instances where these so what the president did last year when that overlap occurred was to issue a directive to address the overlap in general, that is in handling of crude oil export terminals. According to the PIA, the crude oil exports, operation of the crude oil export terminal falls under the midstream sector exclusively. But with the directive now, they are thinking of bringing it under the upstream sector to be regulated by the NUPRC. We all know that this is an aberration. It violates the PIA, but it's the presidency. They can do as they like. But how far that will go, we don't know yet. Just know that crude oil export terminals fall under the midstream segment. Then the next teaser is, under what scope do we classify renewable energy? This is kind of sector. Under what scope? Anyone can give an answer to that. Let me see.
Should I say they fall under the generation sector? The generation scope.
Generation segments.
Am I right, sir?
Okay, it depends. It depends. It depends because under the Electricity Act, renewable energy has different branches. We have the generation, we have the transmission, we have the distribution segment also for renewable energy. Those are the commercial aspects of renewable energy under the Electricity Act. So if you are starting let's say if you are constructing a solar farm now, a solar facility, that solar facility would fall under the generation segment. So you have to get a generation license. That is if the solar facility will be generating more than 1 megawatt of electricity. But if it doesn't involve the generation of if it involves generating less than 1 megawatt of electricity, you don't need a generation license. You just be issued a mini grid permit for that. So that's why I said it depends. The renewable and I enjoin everyone to just read the aspects of renewable energy under the Electricity Act, because it addresses a couple of things on the renewable energy sector. But just get that if you are to start generating renewable energy, electricity from renewable energy now, you would have to get a generation license if the power from there exceeds 1 megawatt. So explain how electricity reaches your house. I guess that is under the value chain. That will be addressed later in the class, or should we address it now so that I won't conflict things, because we are entering into a new session entirely here. So let us just address that now. So I will be sharing some slides that I got, and I'll just speak to them. And if the owner of the slides are on the call right now, I would call them to, speak. So let me see if I can share the screens. Excuse me, please. Five. So we have this submission from Kasmi Chisom Ugu. Submission on the value chain in the petroleum and power industry. So this looks a bit chaotic. I mean, the colors look chaotic. Can someone tell me what's wrong with this, with the content here? Achieve a peace. Are you there? Achieve a peace.
Yes, sir, I'm there. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you.
Please tell us what is wrong with this slide, with this contents. Yeah.
Honestly, sir, I can't really figure it out.
Okay, were you at the last class?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The person indicates here that upstream entails exploration and exploitation. I don't know what that means. And then midstream means refining, and downstream involves pipeline transport and fuel stations. So what do you think is wrong with his classification there?
Okay. Sir,
Thank you, peace. Okay,
Hello, sir.
you want to say something?
Yes, the upstream is supposed to be exploration. Then the midstream, that one is correct. That's refining, just like conversion of the crude oil to different sources. Then the downstream, I think that's the final users.
So what is wrong with what is shown here?
The first one, exploration. I think the second one, exploitation. I think that's a mistake. Then second one, refinery. That one is correct. Then the third one, pipeline transport and fuel station. I think that one is wrong. That one should be the final users.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. My network cost issue again. So basically, the incorrect issue about this picture is that the user puts pipeline transport under downstream sector. Pipeline transportation is a midstream activity. It's a midstream activity because it involves the transportation of crude oil from the upstream to the midstream, where it is processed or refined or shipped for export. So from that journey from upstream to midstream is what we call transportation through pipelines. And you may not use pipelines, you may use trucks to transport crude oil from the upstream to the midstream. So that's an option also. But so that's just to correct that. It's a minor issue, but then I felt I should point that out. Yeah. So the next slide here is on power, the power value chain. Generation companies, transmission companies, distribution companies. Does anyone want to tell us what's wrong here? Anyone? Okay, the only issue I find there is the fact that, okay. Yes, Joe, you can speak up. You can unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
When you were giving the classifications of the areas in the electricity supply, you gave 4 classifications, which was the generation companies, the transmission companies, the distribution companies, and others. Am I correct?
What are the others?
In the others, you said system operations, trading, and renewable energy. You said those were what fall under the others.
So you mean this part here is not complete? This slide is not complete. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good observation. So generation companies, transmission companies, distribution companies, they are just like the major layers, like the major classifications. You have system operators, you have the trading, trading aspect also that is done by the NBET. And mind you, there was a news last week concerning the NBET. Did anyone catch the news? Or if you are conversant with news around the power sector, did you catch any news concerning the power sector that is related to our discussion? Anyone? Okay, what basically happened was that last week when I was explaining, I said that the NBET, that is the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, the NBET buys power from the generation company to sell to the distribution company. So the NBET acts as a trader with a trading license. You understand? However, with the Electricity Acts and with the update last week, that part of the value chain would now be removed. That part of the value chain will be removed now. So distribution companies will be able to transact directly with generation companies through bilateral contracts. Last week I said the contract between NBET and the generation companies to purchase power is based on a power purchase agreement. I'm sure you must have heard about that before. Meanwhile, the contract between the distribution companies and NBET is based on a vesting contract. now that the NBT is being phased out, that is, they are removing the NBT from the equation. That's what was announced last week. So since they are removing the NBT from the equation now, distribution companies will be able to transact or purchase power directly from the generation companies. So I just thought I should mention that. And the other update was the one involving Kaduna Electricity Distribution Company. What happened? It was found that they owe a lot of debts and they are not able to repay. And then there are some lapses in the operations also. So what the NERC did to them was to dissolve their board. That is the board of Kaduna Electricity Distribution Company. So when someone asked last week that's why we're not getting 24/7 power in Nigeria, I remember that I mentioned this aspect also, that distribution companies are not efficient. They are not. They are owing a lot of debt, and that affects their operations also. So this is one of the example, and that has happened to Kaduna Electricity Distribution Company. So that is that from Kasmi, I guess. So thank you very much, Kasmi, for this interesting slide. Let me quickly load another one from Astrop. Yeah. Sorry, just Adetunbi, do you wish to walk us through this presentation? Yes, Adetunbi, yeah. Astrop, are you there? Okay, I'll just go over it with you. So this is a beautiful one to start with. The colors are complementing each other. At least that was the major problem with the last one. So in the oil and gas value chain, Adetunbi writes that we have the exploration and production and seismic operations in the upstream sector, and then it is regulated by the NUPRC. Yes. The midstream operations, we have the hydrocarbon processing transportation activities as regulated by Nigerian midstream, downstream petroleum regulatory authority, not agency. Then the downstream sector, distribution, retailing, and marketing of petroleum. Yes. Does anyone want to give any observation on this aspect? Is there anyone?
Hello, sir.
Yes. You may unmute yourself. No one? Okay. I guess we can proceed then. So electricity supply, industrial generation, transmission, and distribution. Let's see the full picture. Okay. Generation of electricity from natural gas and renewable energy. That is in generation segment, and regulated by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Then transmission segment, movement of high voltages through power lines to distribution companies, regulated by the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Then electricity distribution was transmitted power to end users, you and I. So does anyone want to comment on this part of the slide before I give my own observations? Anyone? Ramat Adetunji, are you there? Ramat Adetunji. Samuel Oluwashimlu, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Okay, do you want to comment on this part of the slide?
Not really, sir. But then just to add, you said in the last class also that in this transmission part, in order to avoid like high voltage reaching our houses, because I think it's going to cause damages to our properties. So like that's why the transmission company is made available to regulate the amount of power that is sent from the generation, which they bought from the generation scope to the distribution, which is to the end users, that is you and I.
Okay. Okay. Basically, the only observation I have here is that the transmission company of Nigeria is not a regulator. It's not a regulator. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission regulates both generation, transmission, distribution, trading, system operations, and all. That is exclusively within the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. So what the Transmission Company of Nigeria does is to manage the transmission facilities like the national grid and of course the high voltage transmission lines. So that's what they do basically. And then they performed system operations before now, but with the Electricity Act, system operations have been bifurcated from their activities. So let's get that Transmission Company of Nigeria is not a regulator. The regulator is the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. And of course, the DISCOs, yeah, you can call them participants. Transmission companies are participants. DISCOs are participants. GENCOs are also participants. So thank you very much, Adetunbi, for the slide, and I'm sure we have learned from what from our slides too. So if you submitted your slides and you wish to discuss it, please let me see your hands up, because so I'm sure that we're all here. Okay, I guess no one then. Just move to mine. So the petroleum value chain, I'll just review what we said last week and what's the task. Of course, the submissions were correct and were on point also, just a little bit of amendments here and there, but we should just understand it. This is a simplified illustration of the value chain. I'm sure everyone can see my screen. So this is a simplified illustration. The upstream sector, the upstream sector is managed by an upstream entity. That is an upstream company. It can be an international oil company or an indigenous oil company. So what they do, the activities under are seismic operations, exploration, development, production, calculation, royalty, and disposal to midstream. So that's what they do, the upstream companies. And then from the upstream, there's mandatory custody transfer to midstream. So custody transfer is just the point where the crude oil that is produced in upstream is measured at the measurement point and transferred to midstream for hydrocarbon processing and for hydrocarbon processing and transportation via pipeline or crude oil terminal operations and export operations. So that's what midstream is does. Then refinery also. Refinery are under the midstream. Then the downstream sector involves distribution, distribution through trucks. All those trucks you see on the road going from one filling station to the other, they are in the distribution segment, like downstream segments. So pricing and retailing. So basically that's what the value chain of the petroleum industry looks like. Of course, it might get more nuanced than this because we have a whole lot of licenses in between. A whole lot of licenses in between. So it depends on what you're actually on the operation you're actually looking at. If you're looking at a operation that involves gas processing, of course you have to get your gas from the upstream first before you can process it. So you have to get licenses to do that also, and then enter into gas sale and purchase agreements and all with the gas aggregation company of Nigeria. So then the power value chain. The power value chain looks like this. And I explained everything last session too. I explained everything last session. So it starts from the gas producer. As you can see, the gas producer is right here. And then to power plants, the gas is supplied to power plants, like the GenCos, then the NIPP GenCos, and the successor GenCos, and generation companies. I shouldn't be saying GenCos. Generation companies, yeah. So then the bulk power is sent to the grid, which is managed by the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Yeah. So the Transmission Company of Nigeria receives the power and sends it to the grid. Then the Transmission Company of Nigeria sends the electricity to the DISCO, that is distribution companies, after which the distribution companies transport the electricity to the final consumers. As you can see here, the final consumers, industrial, commercial, and residential consumers. So that is how it is basically. And what I said earlier about the NBET being phased out, I thought I should put this diagram there. I found this on LinkedIn, posted by someone. So I thought it would be helpful for us too. So ordinarily, this is how it looks like before the Electricity Act, before the removal of the NBET. So what happens there is that you can see it is written here. Someone asked last week that what is the difference between the function of the transmission company and the function of the NBET. And I explained that the NBET handles the contracts and money flow, of course, while the transmission company is the one that handles how power goes from the generation company to distribution companies. So it is explained there also. I guess that gives credence to my explanation last week. So the generation segments transfers energy or transport energy to the transmission segments. That is the national grid. And then from the national grid, the power is stepped down to a lower voltage and given to the distribution companies who gives it to the consumer. So the agreement used to be between NBET, that is the bilateral contract now. The power purchase agreement used to be between the NBET and the generation companies. Now, what happens now is that the distribution segment will be able to go directly to the generation segment to purchase power rather than going through the NBET anymore. So I hope we understood or we understand that. So let's update. So that is that on the power value chain. Honestly, it is as straightforward as that. So we've talked about this earlier. So for the session today, I just like someone to answer, what is a Nigerian company? What do you understand by Nigerian company? Kolawole David, are you there? Kolawole David. Yes, Scholar David, you can proceed. What do you understand by Nigerian company? Or does anyone want to answer instead? Anyone from the audience before I move on? Okay, Ayomide.
Good evening.
Yes.
So I think a Nigerian company is a company that is incorporated in Nigeria and has its head office in Nigeria. Seen as a Nigerian company.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ayomide. That's the general definition or general perspective to it. Does anyone have a contradictory answer to that? Okay, let's go with Ayomide's definition then. But I would explain deeper on that later on why I asked this question. It's very important if you're to be assessing the energy industry. So the laws repealed by the Petroleum Industry Act. Anyone? Okay, Joey.
Good evening again. I think the first law that the PIA actually repealed was the Petroleum Act itself.
Okay.
The NMPC Act, because now NMPC is now a limited liability company. So the NMPC Act has been repealed.
Okay. What other act?
Those are the only two that came into my head now.
I like that. Thank you. Does anyone have other answers? Anyone? Okay, so I would explain more on why I asked this question later on, because it's very important. We don't conflate general ideas with sector specific ideas or provisions. So to begin with, key regulators in the oil and gas sector, we will explain their key regulators and what they do, their functions, basically. And the Minister for Petroleum Resources first. The Minister of Petroleum Resources is responsible for the formulation, monitoring, and administration of government policies in the petroleum industry, as well as promoting or enabling environments for investment in the industry. So the current Minister for Petroleum Resources is our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, as Buhari also was the president back then, the last administration. So although they have Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Oil, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Gas, those are not offices recognized by the PIA. The minister recognized under the PIA is Minister of Petroleum Resources. And the fact that the presidency occupies that position is an aberration, because who does the president report to? The essence of having a minister is for you to supervise and also be supervised by the federal government. So when the ministry is occupied or is headed by the head of government itself, it means there will be no oversight in the Ministry of Operations, and a minister is supposed to be someone with technical expertise. However, I digress. So what you just need to know is that the Minister of Petroleum Resources is a very integral regulator in the oil and gas sector. Then the NUPRC, we explained last week their functions. They are the regulator for all upstream petroleum operations, including technical, operational, and commercial activities. And they are vested with, so before the NUPRC, we used to have the Department of Petroleum Resources, and they were like the primary or dominant regulator at that time, before their powers were bifurcated by the PIA into the NUPRC and the NMDPRA. So the NUPRC takes care of the upstream operations of the former DPR. Understand? So I'm sure everyone knows what upstream is now and what midstream and downstream is now. So I don't have to be going on and on about that. So they perform technical functions and commercial functions. That is the NUPRC. The NUPRC, and one of the technical functions is the implementation of policies and applicable laws, regulations for upstream petroleum operations, the issuance of permits for upstream activities, and conducting bidding rounds for award of PPLs, that is petroleum prospecting licenses. I will talk more on that in this session, the various licenses available. So just stick with me if you don't understand yet. Then they set and enforce approved standards for regulation for plant and installations used in upstream operations. So, like I said earlier, their powers mainly revolved around upstream operations. Then the commercial functions of the NUPRC, they approve commercial aspects of field development plans of all licenses, permit holders and all. Then they ensure cost control in upstream operations. They develop cost studies and benchmarks for the evaluation of upstream petroleum operations. So these are technical terms, of course. They are used by industry operators. So you should, of course, have an idea that, okay, these things exist. And when you see anything that relates to any of these functions, you should know that, okay, it relates to the NUPRC. Then the NMDPRA, that is the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority. They are the regulator for all midstream and downstream operations, including operational, technical, and commercial activities in the downstream, midstream and downstream sector. So they are vested with assets, funds, rights, and liabilities of the DPR, PPRA, and PEF. So, like I said earlier, we used to have the DPR. Aside from the DPR, we used to have the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Authority and the Petroleum Equalization Fund. You understand? So all these offices, the DPR, the PPR, the PF, they've emerged and embedded into the NMDPRA now. So the NMDPRA has authority to determine domestic-based price and prices applicable to wholesale customers of petroleum products, and then the distribution of and pricing of natural gas and petroleum products. The NMDPRA does that in particular. So the authority is also responsible for setting DSOs, that is domestic supply obligations for gas and what is the domestic supply obligation? It means that usually there's a situation whereby upstream producers prefer to, ship their production, their crude oil and their natural gas outside Nigeria for use, maybe because it is more attractive or it is more lucrative to sell outside than to use inside. So what domestic supply obligation does is to ensure that the upstream producer supplies a particular quantity of their products, that is crude oil or natural gas, to the domestic sector, that is to Nigeria first, before exporting the remaining product. So that is what domestic supply obligation does, to ensure that, okay, there's no scarcity of crude oil in Nigeria or natural gas in Nigeria. So furthermore, we have the NCDMB. The NCDMB, that is the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. What they do, they regulate local content. Local content. What does local content mean? Okay, sorry. Anyways, so what does local content mean? It means labor, workforce, and contractors in the petroleum industry. So if you are employing, if you're an operator in the oil and gas sector, the Nigerian local content, the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act applies, to promote indigenous participation, that is participation by Nigerians in the oil and gas industry. So the provisions of the act apply to all matters containing relating to transactions in the Nigerian oil and gas industry. For instance, I think section 3.1 of the Act, that is the Local Content Act, it is shortened as Local Content Act, provides that Nigerian companies will be given first consideration in the award of contracts for all projects, even where Nigerian companies do not present the lowest financial bids, meaning Nigerian companies first when they are considering giving awarding contracts in the oil and gas sector. And then the other time I asked what a Nigerian company is. Now, when you are entering into the oil and gas sector as an operator, you have to be mindful of the equity layouts, that is the ownership layout of your company. For instance, the Local Content Act here defines a Nigerian company as a company formed and registered in Nigeria, one, but with the provision of, but with not less than 51% of equity shares held by Nigerians. So even if you've incorporated a company in Nigeria, that company doesn't become a Nigerian company under the oil and gas sector unless 51% of the equity is held by Nigerians. So for instance, if you have an international oil company and you've incorporated that, and that company, that IOC has been incorporated in Nigeria, if the equity base of the company is not owned by 51%, if 51% of the equity base of the company is not owned by Nigerians, they can't benefit from any of the incentives or reliefs under the Nigerian Local Content Act. So that is very important for us to note. So what they usually do is that these IOCs would restructure their equity layouts, maybe get some other investors to buy shares and increase, like investors that are Nigerians, understand, to increase the capital, the equity base for Nigerians in that aspect. And yes, so that is that on that basically. And then the Federal Ministry of Environment is also regulator. What do? They regulate matters relating to the environment, such as installation of gas transportation and storage facilities. And they also issue EIA certificates, that is environmental impact assessment. So you should note by now that if you want to start any operation or any facility in Nigeria, you would have to have an environmental impact assessment. You have to undertake an environmental impact assessment first before the certificate is now issued to you, to ensure that, okay, the environmental implications of your operations are well considered and taken care of before you start operation. Then we have the Federal Ministry of Trade, Industry and Investment. So what they do basically is to issue exports clearance permit certificates for cross-border sale and delivery of both natural gas and crude oil. So when it comes to export of crude oil and natural gas, they are involved in the whole value chain too. So I hope we understood that. Then the FIRS, yes, administers and collects taxes and fees. Here we are going to talk more about taxes and fiscal regime in our next class. So be there. So major licenses in the oil and gas sector. Now, this is a very serious segment. I would just like us to pay rapt attention, because if you miss it once, you may not get it. Sorry, you will get it only if you read it or if you ask questions. So you should note your questions down, you understand? Like, so that you can ask after the session. So upstream licenses. This, of course, to operate in the upstream sector, you have to obtain licenses issued by the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission. And the first license we are going to talk about here is the Petroleum Exploration License. The Petroleum Exploration License. So I would just like you to view this sequentially. You understand? The licenses follow each other: PEL, PPL, and PML. So, what does the petroleum exploration license do? It gives the licensee the right to exploratory rights on a non-exclusive basis for 3 years and renewable for another 3 years. It does not confer exclusive rights over the license area. So that is, if you want to explore for crude oil in a certain area, you have to get this exploration license. So, however, that license is not exclusive to you alone. You understand? And then you have 3 years, or an additional period of 3 years, to explore for petroleum. So, the next one is the petroleum prospecting license. What does it do? It gives licensees the exclusive rights to, drill exploration and appraisal wells, and also do corresponding test production. And then it gives the licensee the non-exclusive rights to carry out petroleum exploration for a maximum period of 6 years for onshore and shallow water acreages, and maximum period of 10 years for deep offshore and frontier acreages. So you can view petroleum exploration license as an advanced form, and petroleum prospecting license as an advanced form of the petroleum exploration license, because when you are prospecting, what you are doing is you began to drill your wells, your oil wells and appraisal wells and all, and do some test production and all. So that is the petroleum prospecting license. That's what it does, basically. Then we have the petroleum mining lease. Petroleum mining lease is the last lease for the upstream sector, and it is granted to qualified applicants to win and dispose crude oil for a maximum period of 20 years, and it is subject to renewal also. So this is where the production takes place. The petroleum, the PML, is where the petroleum production, that is, sorry, not petroleum production, crude oil production and natural gas production take place. So, and it also grants exclusive rights for the licensee to carry out development and production of petroleum, and exclusive rights to drill, exploration, and appraisal wells in this area. So at this stage, you must be sure that, okay, you've figured out that, okay, there is crude oil in this area, and it is available in commercial quantity, and you can easily win and dispose it to the midstream sector. So that is the upstream. Those are the upstream licenses. And mind you, before now we used to have oil exploration license, OEL, OPL, and OML. That is before the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021. So those licenses are not expired yet, or they are not invalid yet. The license is granted before the PIA. They are not invalid yet. They are still active, pending when they are voluntarily converted or when they are renewed. You understand? So that's why I asked the other time whether to list the laws that are applicable, the laws that were repealed by the PIA. The Petroleum Act hasn't been repealed by the PIA. It hasn't been fully repealed. Let me put it that way. It hasn't been fully repealed by the PIA because there are some licenses that were granted under the PIA, under the PA, rather under the Petroleum Act, that are still in force right now. So they can't just be repealed. But the petroleum, in instances where the Petroleum Industry Act has covered some provisions of the Petroleum Act, those aspects of the Petroleum Act would be invalid. Understand? The provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act would take over in that instance. Very well, we'll talk more about that on the transitional nature from the Petroleum Act to the Petroleum Industry Act, whether what applies in the Petroleum Act still applies in the Petroleum Industry Act, or what happens to the previous licenses that that have been granted by the Petroleum Act. So we are going to talk more about that. So midstream and downstream licenses, and I won't kid you, the midstream and downstream licenses are numerous. Let me put it that way. They are numerous in the sense that this is a very this is a segment with different operations, you understand? Different players, gas processors, gas aggregators, gas distributors, gas OC gas suppliers and all. So they operate in this segment, and of course they will need licenses also. So gas processing license, if you want to, process gas and turn into other petroleum products like methanol or ammonia or fertilizer, you need a gas processing license. You understand? Then gas transportation pipeline license. I told you last week that the Nigerian gas company owns the Nigerian Gas Transportation Limited owns the transportation pipelines in Nigeria. But under the PIA now, companies can obtain licenses to transport pipeline license as long as they meet to transport gas rather, as long as they meet the requirements. Then we have the gas aggregator license also. Before the PIA, we used to have one aggregator, that is the gas aggregation company of Nigeria. But under the PIA now, we can have as many aggregators as possible, in as much as they obtain the license that helps them do this. Then we have the gas transportation network operator license. Of course, we have there's something called network code. So if you want to process gas or transport gas and everything, you would have to enter into a network code with the gas supplier and figure and discuss the terms, and conditions for the arrangement. So this way this license becomes applicable, basically. Then the gas distribution license is also there. Then gas box storage license. Of course, as the name implies, you would understand that, okay, this is what is applicable here. Then wholesale gas supply license, retail gas supply license, crude oil refining license. So as you already know, for Dangote to start operating, you would have gotten a crude oil refining license already. So that is very important. Then petroleum liquid transportation pipeline license. And then we have petroleum liquid network operator license, petroleum product distributor license, box petroleum storage license, and wholesale petroleum liquid supply license, petrochemical production license, petroleum product retail license. So, like I said earlier, these things are, as their name implies, you will be able to figure out that, okay, depending on what you are going into. For instance, if you are given a brief on, okay, our client wants to, start a filling station also, and he needs an overview of licenses or the legal and regulatory framework he should be aware of. Understand? You'll be able to tell you that, okay, you would need this petroleum product retail license. What else will you need there? I think just the retail license for filling stations. And then you'd have to enter into agreements with, marketers, that is the petroleum marketers, the petrol marketers rather, so that they can, distribute their product to your filling station. So that's very important too. Then key regulators in the power sector. We have the Ministry for Power, responsible for the determination and formulation of government policies for the Nigerian electricity supply industry, and they perform functions under the act also. Then we have the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. This is the principal regulator in the NERC, in the Nigeria electricity supply industry. So what they do is that they are responsible for promoting, they issue licenses first, of course. they issue licenses, generation license, transmission license, system operation license, distribution license, supply license, trading of electricity, trading license. They do that. Do you understand? So that is very important. Then we have the Nigerian Electricity Management Service. 172 of the Electricity Act actually provides, for the transfer of operations of Electricity Management Services Limited, that is the PLC, to the Nigerian Electricity Management Service Agency. So what it does is that it makes this agency established under the Electricity Act, under the law. You understand? So what they do is that they take care of technical electrical standards, published by the commission. For instance, they carry out periodic inspections, and they monitor existing power plants, and they monitor installations, and then they check if there's extra high voltage or high voltage transmission, and then they also ensure that the switching stations and the distribution networks are suitable. So everything concerning technical standards in the electricity supply industry is managed by them. And the Rural Electrification Agency, of course, their objective, like their name implies, is to facilitate electrification of rural areas, the unserved and underserved markets, and to support the development of renewable energy sources too. So they do that basically. Then the licensing regime in the power sector. We have the generation license. It allows the licensee to construct, own, operate, and maintain a generation station. So the generation station can be one that is powered by natural gas, or one that is powered by renewable sources or generates renewable sources of energy. So that is very important. That's the generation license. And then there are independent power generators too. I'm sure you know. For instance, the Geregu Limited, owned by Femi Otedola, is is an independent power producer. Understand? So the transmission license. What the transmission license does is to authorize the construction and to maintain the national grid too, and to construct high voltage or establish high voltage lines. So a person licensed, it basically gives a person licensed, the ability to transmit electricity by means of transmission lines. So the transmission system now contains, mainly high voltage, like we mentioned last week. But what I didn't do last week is to give you what high voltage means. Under the Act, high voltage means, voltage that's greater than or equal to 132 kV. 132 kV, that's high voltage. So any voltage that is greater than 132 kV is high voltage. So it is embedded in the transmission system. Imagine that amount of voltage entering your house. I mean, it won't go well at all. So a transmission line is an high pressure cable transmitting electricity, that is high voltage electricity, from generating station to another generating station or substation. So that's basically what the transmission license does. Then the systems operation license. Now you have to understand what system operation is first. System operation is the operation of one or more transmission systems. So it requires the system operator used to be part of the transmission company before, but the Electricity Act has divided their operations now. So by the Electricity Act of 2023, the system operator is licensed by the NERC, to take over the administration of market and system operations in the electricity supply industry. Some of their operations involve, commitment and dispatch of electricity, transmission scheduling, generation outage coordination, transmission congestion management. So what they basically do is just to manage the national grid. And then they also administer wholesale electricity markets. So that's what the system operation license does. Then we have the distribution and supply license. Like we said earlier, a distribution system consists of low voltage electric lines, used for the distribution of electricity from one grid supply point to the point of delivery to consumers. You understand? To eligible consumers. So the license enables the licensee to operate a distribution system that will, facilitate connection of customers to receive electricity supply for the installation and, reading of meters for billing and collection, and to expand distribution networks also. So that's what distribution license does. And the trading license. A trading license permits a licensee to purchase, sell, and trade in electricity. Like I've explained several times earlier, the NBT used to be the sole electricity trader. They are the ones with the trade license before, but with the Electricity Act, distributors can now, trade in electricity or purchase electricity directly from the generation company or generation company. So state licensing, yes, there was an amendment to the Constitution last year on state powers to regulate electricity and electricity markets in their jurisdiction. So before the amendment, what was provided was that states are able to regulate electricity generation, transmission, and distribution in areas not covered by the national grid. But with the amendments, what obtains now is that they're able to do so even in areas covered by the national grid. So what this does is that if a state like Lagos State establishes their Lagos State Electricity Regulatory Commission, for instance, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission will cease to govern electricity operations in that state, because the Lagos State now has their own electricity markets. You understand? So this is enabled by the Electricity Act and the amendment to the Constitution. So of course, like it obtains in the Electricity Act, such state license will be under a state law. So it would provide for the generation, transmission, distribution, supply, and sale of electricity within the states, pursuant to a law made by the House of Assembly of that state. Understand? So, however, what that state cannot do, what a state license cannot do, is to allow the licensee provide interstate electricity. So if you obtain a license to, let's say, distribute electricity in a state, for instance, that license cannot extend to the distribution of electricity to another state. So that is what state licensing is all about. Then mini-grid operations. So mini-grid are basically generation plants that do not produce power exceeding 1 megawatt. So every grid or every generation plant, producing less than 1 megawatt falls under mini grid. So they can either be isolated or interconnected. So, but then the 2023 regulations, the mini grid regulations, defines mini grid as any electricity supply system with its own generation capacity to more than one customer and which can operate in isolation or connected to a distribution licenses network. So mini grid, that's just that on mini grid. You can have like a solar facility or a solar farm, for instance, as long as the solar plant doesn't generate more than 1 megawatt of electricity. That solar plant would require a mini grid permit, not a generation license anymore. I hope you understand that. So any electricity generation between 0 kilowatts and 1 megawatt falls under mini grid. So so that is actually that on for today's session. We've explained the regulatory regime, we've explained the licensing regime too. Now I'll be open to taking questions. Yes, if you want to ask any question, you may unmute your mic and I would give my response. Thank you. So any question, please? Or if you want me to go over something again, so you can. Okay, Adana. Sorry if I didn't pronounce it correctly, but yes, you may ask a question. Adana first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Good evening. So my question is based on the last thing we explained on state licensing. Please, can you go over it again? Because I don't really understand what you said about the national grids. Because you made mention that areas before the licensing came into place, that areas that have access to national grids are being provided, that the states do not provide electricity to that areas. But now states provides electricity to both areas that have access to national grids and those that don't. I don't really understand what you mean by them providing electricity to those that have access to national grids and those that don't. So please, can you throw more light on that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adana. So basically, before the Electricity Act and the amendment of the Constitution, we had one single electricity market that is administered or governed or regulated by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. And we have one national grid. So it is from that national grid that that electricity is distributed across Nigeria. So states do not or didn't have their own electricity market before now, before the amendment of the Constitution. And even before the amendment of the Constitution, states were enabled or were empowered to only establish electricity markets in areas not covered by the national grid. You know what a national grid is, right? Where electricity is taken from basically for transmission and distribution. That's the national grid. So we didn't have anything like state grid or state electricity market. But with the amendment of the Constitution now, what the amendment says is that states can establish electricity markets in areas that are now covered by the national grid. So whether the area is covered by the national grid or the area is not covered by the national grid, when states establish their electricity markets, they will be able to legislate or issue licenses to operators in that state, to electricity operators in that state. So that's what happens in a state licensing regime. I gave the example of Lagos State. Lagos State currently uses the national grid. Understand? Their power is transmitted from the national grid and then to the distribution companies. You understand? However, when Lagos State begins to have their own state electricity markets and state electricity regulatory commission, they would not have any cost to resort to the national grid or the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission for licensing and all. You understand? It is the State Electricity Regulatory Commission that will now issue licenses and other permits that applies to that state only. So that's what the state licensing implies there. But if the state is yet to have their own state electricity markets, then the NERC will continue to regulate over the electricity market in that state. So that's simply what state licensing is all about. Yes, Adan, I see you raising hand again. Okay, Ayomide, you can proceed.
Okay, sorry, please, can you say something about that mini grid permit again, please? I didn't get it very well.
Okay, mini grid permits. You have to understand what mini grids are first. Mini grids are electricity generation facilities where the electricity produced in that generation facility is between 0 kilowatts and 1 megawatt. So those kind of generation facilities are classified as mini grids. So it could be a solar farm, a natural gas power plant, or any other renewable sources of electricity generation, as long as it doesn't exceed 1 megawatt of generation capacity. Now, before you start a mini grid operation, you have to obtain permits. You can either obtain permits as an isolated operator or as an interconnected operator. Do you understand? So an isolated operator is an operator that supplies electricity to unserved areas at all, like areas where they don't have lights, where they don't have electricity at all, where the national grid doesn't extend to. You understand? Where the distribution network rather doesn't extend to. You know, we have normal distribution companies with their own distribution networks. However, there are some places where this distribution network won't get to, maybe in the deep rural areas. So if you have your mini grid facility that's maybe a solar farm, for instance, to supply electricity to that kind of rural area, you have to obtain permits as an isolated mini grid operator. However, the other permit is called the interconnected mini grid operator. What the interconnected mini grid operator, it is applicable when there's a distribution network in the area which you want to supply electricity to. You understand? For instance, maybe in a semi-rural area where their electricity is not constant, for instance, they would need a mini grid operator there. So any mini grid operator that starts supplying electricity to that kind of area, the problem is not that they don't have light. The problem is that the light is not sufficient for them. There's a distribution network there. So what that means is that the mini grid operator would have to get an interconnected mini grid permit, understand, to operate in that kind of instance. I hope I am able to explain better. Ayomide.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So I guess that's all the questions we have for now. So the task for next week would be to examine the deregulation of the Not this, not this, not this. Okay, I'll send the task to the group chats. I hope we all check the group chats and learn from it too. So thank you very much for staying with me throughout this session. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you on Saturday. Yes, Saturday. Please remember, we'll see on Saturday, not next week. We'll see on Saturday where we shall be discussing petroleum fiscals and accounting. Petroleum fiscals and accounting is on Saturday. You don't want to miss it. I'll be inviting someone special to do that because it's a very important, your knowledge of the petroleum industry also includes your knowledge of how money operates in the petroleum industry. So please kindly endeavor to attend that one, because all this I'm doing since last week is basically like an overview or just scratching the surface with you, or an introduction. Let me put it that way. It's been an introduction so far to the sector. So by the time you go into fiscals, you go into the accounting part, to the taxes part, to the development and financing part, you really appreciate this internship more. Yes, thank you very much, and have a nice weekend ahead.
Please, can I get this slides?
Yes, the slides will come in at the end of the internship. The only thing that is provided right now is the recordings. Understand? The slides will be put together and sent at once. You're welcome.